Be the only game in town. However, we've not received a response yet from Thoma Bravo when we reached out for confirmation. What we do know is that Elon's hostile takeover attempt is all about protecting free speech, and Elon's continuing that push for inclusiveness by leveraging his Twitter influence to rally support. Now, he tweeted a poll asking whether the decision to accept his bid should be up to shareholders. With 7 hours left, 2.5 million users have voted, and a resounding 84% said yes. By crowdsourcing opinions, Elon's giving strategic context to the board's fiduciary obligations and framing up an interesting question around stakeholders. Should users get a vote as well? But there's strong opposition. At a concerned all-hands meeting yesterday, Twitter CEO shared the board is not backed into a corner. There are also reports they may be considering a poison pill to prevent Musk from taking over. The move would essentially ruin the company financially by diluting shares so much they're devalued. But yesterday, when asked if his offer were to be rejected, Elon cryptically alluded to a potential plan B.
If in this case you are not successful in, the board does not accept your offer, you've said you won't go higher, is there a plan B?
There is.
I think we would like to hear a little bit about plan B.
For another time, I think.
Classic Elon, right? Well, I do want to highlight that the stock closed $9 below Elon's per share offer. So while some argue the offer undervalues Twitter, if this were to go to a vote, Jillian, the average shareholder does stand to gain.
Well, you got to always have a plan B. Kelly O'Grady in LA this morning. Thank you.
A silent partner in Putin's aggression, Xi Jinping's China is our greatest challenge. In many ways, the most profound test that CIA has ever faced.
CIA Director William Burns calling out China. The spy chief says President Xi is a silent partner with Vladimir Putin in the war against Ukraine, warning Beijing tops the list of challenges facing the agency. Wisconsin Congressman Mike Gallagher is a member of the House Intelligence and Armed Services Committees. I know that you listen to Director Burns, and he doesn't speak very often. He gave a speech yesterday. He chose this topic and to say that China is a silent partner in the war against Ukraine. What did you make of him deciding to come out and say that now?
Well, I'm glad that he did, and Director Burns is right, except it isn't a silent partnership. Prior to the invasion of Ukraine, Xi and Putin signed a 5,000-word statement proclaiming a partnership without limits. So Putin is merely becoming Xi's sadistic sidekick in this new Cold War that they have launched against the West, and he will only grow more dependent on China the more he experiences setbacks in Ukraine. So the lesson for us is at least twofold. One, we need to recognize who we are dealing with, two brutal dictators that want to destroy the West. And secondly, we need to wean ourselves off of our addiction to cheap Chinese manufacturing. You know, Dana, we've been scratching our heads throughout the Ukraine crisis, wondering how the Europeans could have gotten themselves into a position where they're so dependent on Russia for basic energy resources. Well, we've done the same, except with different goods in terms of our dependency on China. So if we're to have a chance of winning this competition, we need to selectively decouple our economy from China before it's too late.
So when the CIA director says this, you would imagine that this is probably something that the entire National Security Council talks about, right? So do you think, from your position on those committees, that the Department of Defense is an agreement? I believe that, from what they've said, I believe that they are, is the State Department as well, because they all have to be in coordination in order to lead the country in that direction.
Well, both the Department of Defense and the State Department have said rhetorically that China is our biggest long-term competitor. But at least in terms of the Defense Department, they've recently downgraded some of the language they've used, not calling China a threat in terms talking in terms solely of economic competition. So that's worrisome. I think the bigger problem with our strategy so far is that the Defense Department seems to be pursuing a strategy, what they're calling integrated deterrence, where they're relying less on hard power, actual lethal American hard power, and more on so-called soft power, whether it's sanctions or hashtag diplomacy, that would be a massive, massive mistake. The second contradiction is on our energy policy, which is totally incoherent and is actually benefiting both Putin and Xi. And there is no way we can compete effectively with the Russians or the Chinese if we pursue this war on domestic energy production.
And the CIA chief also saying that we cannot take lightly that Russia has nuclear weapons and Vladimir Putin could use them. I also wanted to ask you about this because we've seen high-profile leaders like Boris Johnson, for example, going to Kyiv to walk the streets with President Zelensky. Yesterday, President Biden was asked if he would go. Watch.
Will you send senior officials to Ukraine?
Well, we're making that decision now. Thank you.
Who would you send?
What was the reason? Are you ready to go?
Is he ready to go? Well, here's what Jen Psaki, the White House press secretary, said about that.
He's ready for anything. The man likes a fast car, some aviators. He's ready to go to Ukraine. It's true, he does. We are not sending the president to Ukraine.
Do you think the president should go to Ukraine?
Well, at a minimum, I think the Secretary of Defense should go to Ukraine. And I would add to that, I think we should reopen our embassy in Kyiv. The fact that we keep abandoning embassies around the world suggests that we are in a weak position. I think the Biden administration could send a stronger signal by both reopening the embassy and sending Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin to Ukraine. As for the president's aviators, I don't think they're striking fear into the heart of any enemies around the world.
Wait, Congressman, why is the State... it's a great point about the embassy. Has the State Department said why they are dragging their feet on reopening the embassy?
I haven't seen a coherent explanation. I know my colleagues on the House Foreign Affairs Committee have asked that question. But again, I think it gets to the broader problem with our approach to Ukraine, which is from the start we've been reactive and we've also been afraid of provoking Vladimir Putin. Well, now that the Ukrainians are showing with their bravery, with their ingenuity, that they can win this thing, that should give us confidence that we can go back on the offensive. We can have success on the battlefield without needlessly provoking Putin. We can't allow fear to dictate our actions.
Congressman, thank you, and a happy Easter to you and your young family. Thank you so much.
Happy Easter.
Well, violent clashes, President Biden's approval rating sliding to a new low. Just a third of all registered voters approve of how the president is handling his job responsibilities, while 54% disapprove. That's according to a Quinnipiac University poll. Brenda Giannini is a Republican pollster and president of the firm Axis Research, and it is great to have you here. Overall reaction to President Biden's number. Let me just set this up. Quinnipiac poll about a month ago or so had him around this number, and people thought, well, maybe that's an outlier. When you get a second result like this a month or so later, what does that tell you as a pollster?
Well, good morning, Dana. Great to be with you, and happy Good Friday. The Quinnipiac poll is bad news for President Biden. First of all, is sort of the polling nerd looking at the methodology of this poll. The Q poll is all adults, so we would expect this to be some of President Biden's best numbers. This is all adults, not just registered voters, not likely 2020 voters. So the fact that he's at 33% with all adults means if you were to look at midterm voters, he's probably sitting around 30%, which of course is devastating news for the president and his party. And you're right, it's not an outlier. This is now the fourth poll we've seen in a series that has him below 35%. In our own internal data, this is about where we have him. So it looks like this is where he's sitting, headed into November 2022.
So midterms are really about highly motivated voters. So what would this poll look like, though, if it was likely voters or, instead of just adults?
Yes, so I'm guessing if Quinnipiac unfortunately didn't give us those breaks, but if we were to look at likely 2022 voters, it probably would put him right about 30%.
Wow.
Which we've seen in the past. We saw when President Bush hit the low 30s. He's looking, it's looking very hard for him and his party. I do think Democrats are going to turn out their loyal base. We've seen Democrats have a great ground game, especially in these key states. So I think they'll be able to turn out their base. What they're not going to be able to rely on are those suburban women, Hispanics.
Well, let's talk about Hispanics because in that same poll, President Biden's job approval amongst Hispanics is at 26% approval. Okay, that to me, for them, approve at 34%. No, approve 26%. There we go. So
26. Yep.
So 26%. I mean, Brenda, that's really bad.
It's awful.
Okay.
And it's the worst we've seen for a Democratic president since as long as I've been doing this, which I'm embarrassed to admit is far too long. But what we've seen, so 2020 wasn't a fluke. We started seeing the summer of 2020, Hispanics moving away from the Democratic Party. It started with the protests that summer. It started with defund the police and really escalated through the election. We've only seen that worsen. As we approach 2022, Hispanics are moving farther and farther away from the Democratic Party. And what we're hearing from them is that the Democratic Party just could not be more out of touch with what they're concerned about, what they care about. They're not focused on inflation. They're not focused on, rising cost of goods. They're too busy talking about climate change, too busy talking about donor policies.
And how does immigration policy fit into that?
And so we're really here.
How does immigration policy fit into that?
Immigration, actually, we just finished focus groups this week in Arizona with Hispanics. Hispanics are very much aligned with the Republican Party. When it comes to immigration, Title 42 is seen as a giant mistake, particularly if you're in Texas or Arizona. They really want a plan in place for when we see that surge at the border. They want it to be humane, but they want a plan in place so they don't see increased homelessness, increased crime, all of the things that they're worried about on a day-to-day basis.
Brenda,
and so they're looking to Republicans.
One of the things that Democrats have been saying is that we just don't tell our story well enough. Here is former Massachusetts Governor Deval Patrick in a Newsweek op-ed saying Democrats would do better to quit whining about poor messaging and poor media coverage and get back to engaging directly with voters. The case for voting for Democrats in the midterms is not to reward Democrats for what they have already accomplished, but to enable Democrats to finish the job. And just quickly, so everybody remembers, here's what President Obama said just last week.
Mr. President, what do you say to Democrats worried about the midterms? What do you tell Democrats worried about the midterms? We got a story to tell, just got to tell them.
Is it the message, Brenda? Last question.
Well, I agree with Deval Patrick that the election can't come fast enough for Republicans. I wish it was tomorrow. I don't think it's going to be the message, that they're off message. For one, their message has been scattershot. I don't have confidence that they can get together on a unified message, and I think their rank and file has reason to be upset with them. But it's really easy for Barack Obama to parachute in and say, hey, guys, we just need to have a message and to leave out. The reality is, what are they going to run on? What is the narrative? They're not going to run on the American Rescue Plan, while it was popular at the time. Right now, independent voters, Hispanics, suburban women, all those groups we talked about, they blame the American Rescue Plan for high inflation. They don't think it was well thought through, too generous. I don't think they can run on the COVID policies. The Biden administration whiffed on Delta variant.
It's like they're out there on the South lawn looking for any sort of Easter egg, little messaging nugget that they can use. We'll see if they find any. Brenda, thank you, and have a very happy Easter.
Thank you. Happy Easter to you, too.
Take care. Jillian?
Well, after Ukrainian forces sunk a Russian warship in the Black Sea, long-range Russian missiles struck Kyiv overnight. Trey Yanks coming up has an inside look. He's on the ground there. Plus, Elon Musk speaks out for the first time after his offer to buy Twitter. He is making a plug for the importance of free speech and inclusivity. We got Clay Travis with us next for his reaction. Well, moments ago, 30 migrants who crossed into the U.S. along the southern border arrived here in Washington, D.C. They hopped off a bus in the nation's capital, really just a hop, skip, and a jump from 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. This is the third bus now that Texas Governor Greg Abbott has directed to D.C. This after announcing last week his initiative to bus migrants out of his state here to Washington is his effort, he says, to counter lenient federal immigration policies.
Well, the Russian military targeting the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv overnight with cruise missiles after confirming one of its warships in the Black Sea was sunk. Moscow has reportedly sent a formal diplomatic note to President Biden warning him to stop arming Ukraine after the president approved an additional $800 million in military aid. Trey Yingst is live in Kyiv, Ukraine, with the latest. And Trey, I'm sure for Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, the president's decision to send more has been welcome.
Absolutely, Dana. Good morning. Overnight, long-range Russian missiles targeted the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv. Russia's defense ministry confirmed the attack took place, saying they hit a machine-building plant that was being used to produce anti-air and anti-ship systems. As Russian forces increase attacks in the eastern part of Ukraine, Russia says it will continue to target Kyiv.
The number and scale of missile strikes against targets in Kiev will increase in response to any terrorist attack or sabotage committed by the Kiev nationalist regime on the Russian territory.
The strikes come after Russia's flagship vessel of the Black Sea Fleet, the Moscow, sank. Russia claims a fire on board caused the cruiser to sink, but the Ukrainians say they hit the ship with 2 Neptune missiles. These developments are taking place as the Ukrainian people continue to find atrocities left behind in the wake of the Russian occupation around Kyiv. We were in the suburbs again today of this capital, where war crime prosecutors are still digging up bodies from mass graves. We also got a better look at the extensive destruction left behind, as the city continues to brace for the possibility of another Russian ground offensive. We've heard air raid sirens over the past 24 hours. The Russians continue to target Kyiv from the air. And again, the civilian population here paying the highest price. Dana?
Trey Yings, thank you, and stay safe.
Well, I think it's very important for there to be an inclusive arena for free speech, having a public platform that is maximally trusted and broadly inclusive is extremely important to the future of civilization.
But you've described yourself.
I don't care about the economics at all.
Well, free speech is what Tesla CEO Elon Musk says is motivating him to try and take over Twitter. He says the social media platform, quote, needs to be transformed as a private company. He also says it should follow the laws of the countries in which it operates, or otherwise stay out of the business of regulating users' speech. Let's bring in Clay Travis, founder of Outkick. Clay, let's pick up on what he just said. Are you buying this? The world's richest man suddenly doesn't care about the bottom line. He just wants to do what's best for humanity.
Well, I think one of the luxuries of being the world's richest man is you can buy things that you don't have to get an immediate return from. And Jillian, one of the things I would wonder is when you're worth around $300 billion, as Elon Musk is, he could buy Twitter for the offer price he has of a little over $40 billion. And I think Elon Musk, having redefined the way we build cars and having proven that he can send rocket ships to space better than NASA, is looking towards the future of civilization, much as those two investments did, and trying to figure out, how do I ensure that democracy remains as cogent and powerful in the years ahead? And I think he's recognized rightly that Twitter is the most important marketplace now for ideas in the United States and probably around the world, and he wants to preserve it.
Clay, I think you just said it better than he puts it himself, so thank you for that. Take a look at this from the Wall Street Journal. The offer is causing a meltdown in progressive circles that don't appreciate Mr. Musk as much on free speech as they do when he's building electric cars. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think it's totally fair. And the reason why there's a meltdown, Jillian, and I think this is very important, is because what Elon Musk is trying to do is produce content-neutral policies. So the sitting president of the United States is not able to be banned, while the Ayatollah of Iran is able to use the platform, so that you don't have a situation where the Babylon Bee, a satire site, is locked out of their account, while the Taliban is allowed to promote their account in Afghanistan. It's inconsistent, it's arbitrary, it's capricious. And if we're truly going to have a marketplace of ideas where everyone's voice can be heard, think about how crazy this is, Jillian. What the left-wing blue checkmark brigade members are complaining about is the idea of everybody being able to have their voice heard and to hear their opinions as loudly and widely distributed as possible. And that, to me, is the ultimate importance, because, look, we got things wrong on COVID in this country. I think one reason why is because we were stifled in debate on Twitter. And certainly, if you look at the way the 2020 presidential campaign played out, particularly the New York Post investigation of Hunter Biden, that stifling may well have swung the overall election. When you consider, Jillian, I mean, think about it. If 20,000 people in Wisconsin, in Georgia, and in Arizona changed their votes, where the outcome was about 40,000 votes, then we have a different president. I don't think it's crazy to think that big tech had a big role in that outcome.
Let's add to that list you just gave us of nefarious world players who are still allowed on Twitter, Vladimir Putin, whose official Kremlin handle is still alive and well up there. I checked this morning to double down on that so that I could double down on this and confirm it for you. As he's conducting a genocide in Europe, allowed to say whatever he'd like to say on Twitter. I want to ask you quickly, before I let you go, about this divide that's also brewing now between Twitter users, some, potentially many of whom support Musk's takeover, and then Twitter employees themselves who are reportedly up in arms about the move. Not happy. A lot of the engineers threatening to quit if he actually follows through.
Well, first, I hope they quit if the reason they're going to quit is because they're upset about the idea that Twitter might embrace more of the First Amendment. But I think most of those people are not actually going to quit, Jillian. This is going to turn into all the people who said they were going to go to Canada if Donald Trump won the 2016 election. How many of those people actually moved to Canada? I don't remember very many celebrities actually moving to Canada in 2016 when Trump won. And I'll be surprised if very many Twitter employees actually leave Twitter if Elon Musk buys the company. I think it's a sham. It's perfect social media posturing, draws attention to you, but doesn't have any actual substance behind it.
All right, well, Clay, we got to leave it there. But happy Good Friday to you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, and thanks for having me.
We are awaiting a Supreme Court decision that could drop as early as today. The case takes on whether a Virginia high school's so-called equity-based admissions process is actually discriminatory. The decision is going to have major ramifications for colleges' affirmative action policies. Lucas Tomlin is here in Washington. He has got all the details. Hey, Lucas.
Good morning, Jillian. Thomas Jefferson High School, located outside the nation's capital, has been ranked the #1 public school in the U.S. for years. But recently, the school board decided to scrap its long-standing rigorous admissions policy because they did not think enough Black and Hispanic students were represented. This caused outrage among many parents of the school, where a majority of the students are Asian.
What we found was an email that literally had a school board member saying that they knew that the process was anti-Asian, LOL, laughing out loud. And this little text message reveals exactly the problem that we're facing today.
The new admissions policy increased the enrollment of Black students from 1% to 7%, Hispanics from 3% to 11%, and decreased Asian American representation from 73% down to 54%. Former President Mike Pence weighed in during a speech at the University of Virginia earlier this week.
Patriotic education has been replaced by political indoctrination. But let me be clear. Critical race theory is nothing more than state-sanctioned racism, and it should be rejected by every state in every city in this country.
The Thomas Jefferson School Board says it's trying to achieve, quote, racial balancing. The board says it does not set any racial quotas, and admissions are, quote, race blind. Despite a lower court's ruling who found the new policy discriminatory, the school board said in a statement it wanted to improve geographic, socioeconomic, and racial diversity. Virginia's Attorney General isn't buying that argument.
And what you've seen right now with the Fairfax School Board is, I've said before, the oldest form of bigotry is anti-Semitism, but the only state-sanctioned form of bigotry acceptable in America today, right now, is anti-Asian bigotry.
And as you mentioned off the top, Jillian, we're awaiting a response by the Supreme Court for that emergency request filed by the Coalition of Parents of Thomas Jefferson. Jillian.
Lucas Tomlinson here in Washington. Thanks so much. Dana?
Well, schools are shocking parents by teaching children as young as 5 about gender identity and sexual orientation. Now, some are asking, should schools teach sensitive topics like these to any grade level they choose, or is it the parents' right to decide how young is too young? Joining us is former Education Secretary under President Reagan and Fox News contributor Bill Bennett. It is really good to have you. I just want to show you and our viewers. This is from the Edmonds School District in Washington State. This is for first grade. This is a graphic on gender categories. Girl, boy, neither, or both. And then let's go to Oregon, just south of Washington, of course. This is third grade performance indicators. Can they identify human reproductive systems, define sexual orientation, and recognize differences and similarities of how individuals identify regarding gender or sexual orientation? Maybe important for, important and fine for children to learn this at some point, but are these ages too young, sir?
Absolutely. This is madness. It is wrong. It is harmful. Any developmental psychologist or psychiatrist who hasn't been bullied into political correctness will tell you that. And this is just going to confuse children. This is not where their curiosity is. That curiosity needs to be turned to reading, then to math and other subjects. This is ideology making its way into the classroom. This is what's fueling school choice. This is why a lot of parents are fleeing the classroom. This is just quackery and madness, and again, very harmful, and parents are reacting to it. You know, it's interesting now, Dana, with the political season, education will be an issue, a very important issue, I think, in November. And as we saw in that Virginia race for governor, it can make a big difference where people stand.
In New Jersey, there was a similar thing went around. This is school lesson plans for the next fall. And now the parents heard about this and they're upset about it. And so Phil Murphy, the governor, was like, OK, well, maybe we'll take a look at it. But he's only willing to do that because parents spoke up. So do you think that even before the election, parents will pressure some of these school districts to at least rethink and let them have a say as to when their children learn about these topics?
Yeah, I do. I do think parents will look at it, because one thing that happened during COVID that you might say is a positive is parents got to look into the schools. They got to look into what their children were learning, and in some cases saw that some of this stuff was coming in. Now, the alert is out now, and parents are communicating in ways they haven't before and saying we are not going to stand for this stuff. School board elections now matter in ways that they didn't before. That's a very good thing. But again, unfortunately for public schools, and you know, one hopes for improvement in public schools, this means an exodus from a lot of those schools into charters, which are other forms of public, into private schools or religious schools.
Well, and one of the other things that was interesting about Glenn Youngkin when he ran for governor in Virginia, one of his applause lines at the events he did was that he promised to make sure that there was advanced education for math and science and English in all of the high schools. And he got applause for that. Well, Mayor Eric Adams, he said yesterday he will reverse a de Blasio idea, which was to remove gifted and talented programs from the schools. There's a big backlash for that, and Mayor Adams is saying we're going to go in a different direction. Is that a good sign, in your opinion, I'm assuming?
Yeah, it is a good sign for Mayor Adams. He's on a roll now. He's an interesting guy. You know, verdict is still out on him, but he's right about this, the gifted and talented. And the lead-in piece about Thomas Jefferson High School here in our neighborhood in the D.C. area, maybe the best high school in the country. You know, they say that we don't have enough Hispanic and black students. The way to remedy that is to work harder with these Hispanic and black students in grades 1 through 8 to get them so they can score higher and get into Thomas Jefferson on the merits. It's an interesting case. But, Mayor Adams is right about this. He's reversing the de Blasio regime. And there need to be these merit schools in New York City. There have been for years, very distinguished schools.
Yes.
And they need to come back, and the good ones remain.
And they really give those students a leg up in life, and we need them so that we can stay competitive. Thank you, and a happy Easter to you. Thank you so much for being here.